And it's a beautiful film. I mean that. I think it aligns with my personality. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to Christmas films/movies. It's that time of year again where we switch on the TV and weep because the town of Bedford Falls did something right for once. Growing up in Britain, I knew all about It's a Wonderful Life, but also other Christmas films like Die Hard, Gremlins. Are we agreed these are all Christmas films? White Christmas, Miracle on 34th Street, and a film criminally overlooked by the Academy, Santa Claus the Movie. Now that was a list of American Christmas movies that I grew up with in Britain. But what about those American Christmas films that I only saw after moving to America? Whether they just weren't popular in my household in particular, or if they never reached the shores of Britain, here are 5 Christmas films that I only watched after moving to America. Now, it's quite likely that the majority of people watching this have never heard of Four Christmases, but let me tell you something about that film. It's so intertwined with my move to the United States for the very reason that it hit cinemas just weeks after I moved here. For the uninitiated, it stars Vince Vaughn, 6'5", and Reese Witherspoon, 5'1", and don't think for a minute that this went unnoticed by the marketing team. I mean, look at this front cover. How is that for absolute comedy gold? My memory of the plot is a little hazy, but I think it involves the main couple spending individual Christmases with each of their 4 parents, who, by the way, happen to be Sissy Spacek, Jon Voight, Robert Duvall, and Clara from Back to the Future 3. I seem to recall that Reese Witherspoon is afraid of bouncy castles for some reason, and I'm feeling ill just thinking about it. How can I sum up my feelings on this film? Well, you've heard of the infinite monkey theorem, right? It posits that a monkey hitting random keys on a keyboard for an infinite amount of time will eventually land on the entire works of William Shakespeare. If you give it a week, it might come up with 4 Christmases. A joyless waste of 90 minutes that was, by all accounts, a casualty of the 2008 writers' strike. It comes lowly recommended from me, but we go from 4 Christmases to 4 more Christmas films, including this. When I moved to the United States, I lived with my in-laws, and my in-laws had cable. That meant being forced to watch films that they wanted to watch that you ordinarily wouldn't. And just as The Santa Claus was popular with my in-laws, I understand it's become quite a Christmas staple for much of the United States. I was a kid in 1994 when this film came out, and I don't really remember it being that big in Britain. This could be because it was released a year later in 1995 when all of the hype had died down. Either way, I get the impression that the writers came up with the title first and then tried to fit the plot around it. As in, let's use the legal sense of Claus and then contrive a story where there's this loophole that makes Tim Allen Santa. Long story short, Tim Allen accidentally destroys Santa, which is peak Tim Allen. And the loophole is anybody that does this has to take Santa's place. But think of the possibilities here. At best, you end up with Tim Allen. At worst, you end up with an unhinged maniac who's given carte blanche to enter people's homes on Christmas Eve. But as a film, I remember it being fun, if by the numbers. I don't really remember much about it other than its inevitably heartwarming ending. Could you imagine a Christmas film without one? Oh, sorry everyone, I couldn't save the day this time, so Christmas is cancelled forever, followed by closeout music from Radiohead. Or, to put this in the context of the Santa Claus itself, he drops the kid in one of the bleakest endings to a Christmas film ever. I mean, that would be I wouldn't want to see that myself. Oh, Elf, Elf, Elf. I mean, seriously, what's so funny about somebody dressed in green and a stupid hat? But by all accounts, and much to my surprise, it turns out that Elf was actually quite a big hit in the UK. However, released in 2003, that's when I would have been at university, when the only 3 things I had on my mind were drink, and so I probably overlooked it. But I did watch it after moving to America. A vehicle for Will Ferrell, it also stars Zooey Deschanel, James Caan, and Clara from Back to the Future 3. And in a similar vein to The Santa Claus, the plot also revolves around an ordinary human who gets accepted into North Polian society. Only this time, as an elf, hilarity ensues when Will Ferrell loudly falls off things, onto things, and into things. But it is a relatively sweet Christmas story, and even I'm not going to dump on everything that everybody loves. I may be green, but I'm not the Grinch. I may be English, but I'm not Scrooge. Elf is definitely better than Four Christmases, and arguably better than The Santa Claus, if I've had coffee. It's what you expect. It's a Christmas story, although not literally. That would be this. A Christmas Story is one of those unusual cases of a Christmas film being big in the United States, but barely seeing the light of day in Britain. And actually, now that I say that, I've even spoken to some Americans, particularly on the West Coast, who've never heard of it. And I can't decide if that's because it just sort of got shown routinely on regional television in places like the Midwest where it's set, or if the people that told me that were wrong. What I can say is I watched it, maybe about 10 years ago, just after I first moved here, and I remember really enjoying it. But now that I try to think back to what actually happens, I struggle. It's just a sort of montage of moments. There's the main kid in the glasses, who's played by Peter Billingsley and was also in The Dirt Bike Kid, that's a niche reference, who gets set upon by an unpleasant ruffian. There's the bit where that other kid gets his tongue stuck on the pole because it's in the height of winter. And I don't remember the outcome of that. He could still be stuck to it for all I know. And I remember something about a leg lamp, which has become famous because of this film. I remember there being snow in it, and everybody that I watched it with made a big deal about the fact that it was set in Indiana because that's where we lived. It's one of those weird films where I just do not remember the plot. That's the thing about A Christmas Story. It's like having a whole bottle of bourbon to yourself. You don't really remember much of it, but you know you had a ruddy good time. On a personal note, it was released on November 18th, 1983, which would have been my second birthday. So I think given that and the timeline in which I grew up, had I been raised in the United States, I imagine this would have been one of my favourite Christmas films. But who am I? I'm just Lawrence Brown, right? Which reminds me, our final entry keeps it in the family. Charlie Brown, my great uncle from America who's also animated. Don't get me wrong, Charlie Brown was and probably still is widely distributed in the UK. It's just, I don't remember ever seeing a Charlie Brown Christmas. Now this could be because Britain's busy focusing on its Christmas specials. You know, like Morecambe and Wise or that episode of Mr. Bean where he gets a turkey on his head. But I did see it once again after moving in with my in-laws. And it's a beautiful film. I mean that. I think it aligns with my personality. And at 30 minutes in length, it's short, but it's mercifully short for a Christmas film. And I remember it well. It has this really serene ice skating scene at the start, although I was traumatized by the director's cut in which Snoopy fell under the ice and drowned. Was it? That was, okay, that was a fan film. And one thing that was really impressive about it, it was a Christmas film made in 1965 that dealt with the issue of depression. And to help overcome his Christmas blues, Lucy thinks that Charlie should head up the Christmas play, because clearly Lucy has never directed toddlers before. That said, at first, he walks in there like he's Julie Taymor. He's all full of confidence and telling people where to stand and where to sit and what to say. And then he makes a hash of the Christmas tree and they all laugh at him. What have we learned today, kids? Now, as sweet and memorable as this film is, try to imagine it with a laughter track. This was the reality for most animated TV at the time, and CBS had genuine concerns that without one, the film would flop. It didn't, and the film remains a fine example of why simplicity is key. Of course, the real winner of the film is its music, particularly the tune Christmas Time Is Here, which has since become a holiday standard and stays in your head for 3 days. You can thank me for that later. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Vlogmas. If you're not subscribed to my channel, do that at the end of this video so that you don't miss another video on this crazy train toward Christmas. Incredibly thrilled to see that the channel has gained 15 new patrons since the start of Vlogmas. If you would like to support this channel and everything I do, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Until tomorrow, goodbye.